Thank you, Kim, for being here. Obviously, everyone knows me, I presume. I'm Sophia. I run all of the indie developer stuff here at Steel Media Pocket Gamer, but I will let Kim introduce himself and tell us a bit about what he does at Paradox.
All right. So, I assume everyone in the room knows about Paradox? Hands up.
Yeah. No, clapping. All right, there you go. Playing the games, our games, you play our games? It's like a few, okay. Shareholders? Any shareholders? All right, cool. So I'm Kim. I released my first game mid-90s, so I'm still on the younger side, but getting older. Studio guys, I've done studios and games for a very long time. I used to actually love doing code, art, and all that. Had a few studios. I worked for PlayStation R&D in California, shipped PlayStation 4. Spent some time running studios for King, which was great, and then I joined this company called Paradox that was old friends of mine who did these amazing games that I just had to be part of. So I'm the chief strategy officer, and I'm here to talk about our long-term mid-long-term strategy for the company.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's actually a great segue into what I was going to ask first, which is obviously the point of our talk as well. I mean, it's 2020, it's a new decade. Does that mean some alterations for strategy at Paradox? What does the next 5 years, what are the aims and strategies at Paradox?
Not really. So this was the headline for the whole Fireside chat, was that we look at everything from a 5-year cycle. And a baseline is a game for us takes 3, 4, 5 years to make. So it's kind of default. We need to look at it from that perspective. Though in recent years, and especially me coming on board, we started looking at the bigger picture in long term and started to structure things. So 2020 has been set for a very long time for us. And I can also say it looks amazing. We're pretty happy. We announced Crusader Kings 3. We have Bloodlines 2 coming up, and there will be more announcements throughout the year. So this is a fantastic year for us. On the bit of a longer term, we obviously have a strategy. So I can talk about it forever. I think Well, here's the thing. A strategy is essentially just a more complicated plan. So it's not that hard to put on paper. It's the execution part that is hard. So what we've done is that we, as any structured company should do, figure out what's the goal, and from a more business perspective. So we've defined what we call a strategic intent, which could be a goal. We talk about it as intent because things could change. And that's essentially become the genre leader of deep, complex, endless games by 2025. And that gives us kind of a target from a business perspective where we're shooting for. It helps us to define what we should be doing, but more importantly so, what we shouldn't be doing. And then we can talk about exactly what that means, but genre leader is obviously genres within areas where we want to be strong, and deep, endless, and complex is more mechanically driven of the types we want to do, and 2025 is just, a 5-year horizon. It was 6 years when we established it.
So obviously, as you say, deep, complex games is part of the structure and, let's say, the DNA of the games. But what would you say that means for Paradox's portfolio of titles? Does that mean sticking with what you're doing but evolving what's in the game, or does it mean even branching out to new areas?
So obviously we have a portfolio strategy for the games, and then we have a corporate strategy, which I do, and I work very closely with the portfolio side. But I think most people know us for our grand strategy games, and most people don't know we also have a large management segment, as we talk about. So City Skylines has sold 7 million copies, which is a huge game for us. So we've structured a portfolio in 3 segments, as we call them, and this is striving to become the genre leader. The first one is strategy, and that's dominated by grand strategy, but we also do other things. We did BattleTech, for example. We did Age of Wonders Planetfall, which is outside of the grand strategy. So we're expanding in that. Then we have the management segment, which is spearheaded by cities, but we also have a number of games like Surviving Mars, smaller titles, and we just announced in Berlin a game called Surviving the Aftermath, which is a management game for us. And then thirdly, with Bloodlines, it's an RPG segment, which we actually don't have any traction on at all. We dipped our feet into it, but in Bloodlines is supposed to be the first of many to come. So we structured a portfolio in like 3 larger segments, and then we have a plan for each of those, how we scale.
Yeah, okay, and of that, I think one thing that's interesting with that strategy is obviously, you know, Paradox doesn't only do PC, but is well known for PC. It's like synonymous with the brand. But obviously with 2020, we've got new things like new consoles, and obviously, you know, we're here at Pocket Gamer Connects. And so specifically on the mobile side, I wanted to touch, you know, you came in originally to bring some mobile expertise and learnings to Paradox. And is mobile still a part of that future strategy?
Sure, for sure. So I came in and my intention was to mess the company up a bit, to be honest, and go in and cause some stir and build things from a very different way that the company was used to. So with the experience, especially coming from King, I had a very different model from what I would say is a classical way of building PC premium product. And it took a while for I get some alignment, but roughly a year ago we decided that mobile shouldn't be a separate unit on the side, and we integrated it into our core portfolio. So essentially, the strategy segment, management segment, and RPG segment, they all have mobile on their agenda, and there are mobile games in development with all of these, though it's a minor investment compared to the really, really big games within our core business. Because we know mobile will be part of our future. We haven't cracked it yet, but it will be part of our future. I think in terms of strategy, console is closer to our heart. And I think for most studios, it's like, sure, I can do PC console, it's not a problem. But for us, it's been a big shift from being able to have our games on PC and also to have them proven on console. And that was a decision we did when we established the strategy a year ago, that instead of having every game greenlight as a PC and then we'll see, maybe we do console, all games go through our greenlight process with the assumption that it will be on console at the same time. And again, from an outside perspective, that might not look like a big deal, but for us it's huge. And that's part of a 5-year plan. So our internal studio in Stockholm, they're not on board with it because they built PC for 20 years. And for them, it's like, this is going to take a long time for us to transition, not only technology, but mentality, how to build it in UI and so. So it is a big part. And so that decision came into effect. We've shipped games on console. They work, but it's not fully integrated. So that's a pretty big step for us.
So yeah, Paradox is sort of short and long term is sort of platform agnostic, really, and being a part of each ecosystem, even if there's focal points in different areas, it's approaching everything. I mean, talking of that though, I mean, that obviously is one thing that I thought about while you were talking about mobile is about, you know, you say bringing the mobile into the brands and having them a part of that, so they're experiences that fit in line with Paradox's established, you know, ecosystem of games. Moving forward, is that something that you're still planning to do? Is it about new games, new IPs as we move forward into new generations, especially on the console side? Or is it more about focusing on growing kind of what you have?
So this is something I don't think we've talked about publicly ever. And if we go back to mobile for us is the purpose of bringing in a new audience. That's what we want, and also there's a lot of learnings that the mobile side, especially with free-to-play, do that we want to transition into PC and console in a good way. Though the big shift we're doing, and this is part of the strategy as well, it's a very culture big shift that internally we look at every game more from a mechanical standpoint. It's like, what cool mechanics can we make in the next strategy game, in a city builder, and so on and so on. And they've all been a bit standalone. Now we're going to look at it much more from a brand perspective and a franchise perspective. So we launched, for example, the Surviving Mars game 1.5 years ago, and it was our first on console. It was the first on a new brand that we called Surviving. And now we announced the Surviving the Aftermath. So they are connected in kind of a franchise model. We don't know if it's going to work, but that's part of it. And so it's a focus shift from single games to a universe of an entity that we can expand, hence also going for more platforms. Yeah. So it's a big one for us.
Yeah, I mean, and as part of that, there's obviously as I'm guessing, speaking partly for myself here, as you explore that, there's different risks to manage, basically whether there's something new or, for example, let's say growing cities might be a much lower risk than bringing in something new. So, something I'm interested in is how do you at Paradox both quantify that risk and then how do you mitigate and manage it?
I wish I had a whiteboard. It would be better. So there's so many different levels. Obviously, each game has a risk model, and we look at it, and we've done that for a long time. So as a publisher for past decade, we kind of have a process. Some studios think it's very tedious, but it's there for guarantee that we actually make a good game together. And then on the segment level, we have it on the portfolio level, and then we have on a corporate level. So it sounds a bit more bureaucracy than what it actually is. But for example, if we take Bloodlines, who's spearheading RPG, that's a huge bet for us. It's an insanely expensive game. I'm very excited about it. I'm also terrified because what could be. It's an unknown brand. So from a risk level, I'm the one saying, this just there's so much risk into this game, but we should do it. It's awesome, but we need to manage the portfolio. So what we do on different levels is that, for example, for each game, we try to give them something that is what we call a first. So the Surviving the Aftermath is a first on Epic Store, which is a big shift for us. A huge chunk of our revenues from Steam. And that's also a risk, which has been fine, and I don't think there's a high urgency, but we want to diversify. Obviously, Steam is amazing, we're great friends, we want to stay there forever, but also spreading it. So Epic is good, and hence that game is a first into that. So we try to give that to all games. I wish we could do the same thing on the RPG side, have a smaller game first, but we'll see.
Yeah, talking of that, it's interesting just briefly that you touch upon the news channels. Like we've got the Epic Store, and obviously in other channels we've got PlayStation, we've got streaming not streaming. I was thinking platforms such as Xbox Game Pass.
Mm-hmm.
And a part of I wonder is how do you at Paradox sort of make sure that you're not jeopardizing your existing channels, but you're taking advantage of those new and emerging markets that are coming forward?
So the model is actually very, very, very simple. Imagine you have $100 and you are about to invest it. Anyone who manages a portfolio, if you trade stock or whatever you do, you always bet a certain set of something you truly know what it is. So you maybe put $100 on something that will give you a fairly safe return over a certain time that you're fine with, and then you split the other maybe 15 into something mid risk and the other 5 on high risk. So we do essentially the same thing. Anything that's our core business that we can grow, that we know will be net positive revenue-wise over a certain time that we're safe with, that's where we do our major investments. And then people like me go in and say, we should do some holy crap, amazing things out here that everyone hates, that is super scary and might be super messy. But as long as it's fairly contained and a minor investment and the purpose is to generate learnings, that's completely fine. That's harder to do on the game side, but we try to do it on the game side as well. So every game, at least the smaller games, like Surviving the Aftermath into Epic Store is the same thing. Like there's one game whose spirits into console. We talk about Asia, obviously. We talk about cloud gaming. We talk about subscription. Game Pass is also one of the things we have announced with a number of games, because we want to see how will that affect our ecosystem. But from a pure investment for risk, it's just, we are very conservative and kind of build year after year rather than try everything at once.
Yeah, so of that, learning a lot of things through experimentation and taking things, whether it's through mechanics, whether it's through store platforms. I'm wondering if there is any sort of specific examples of those experiments that you've done at Paradox that you've seen, great success, or even some that might have surprised you the opposite way around, that you were convinced would work, but maybe didn't go the way you planned.
Quite a few. So so these things I talk about are somewhat abstract. And what I do on the side, I have a mandate and a budget, so I can spend on what we call strategic projects. So essentially, we look at all the game projects that are being built in the coming 5 years. We accumulate all the risks that's been said with all of these, and then we try to do strategic projects in live games or elsewhere to mitigate that risk. So one example, for example, now we launched our own launcher on PC. So when you start one of our games, you come into a launcher where we can communicate with customer, and then from there you start the game. Before that was out, we actually didn't really know if that's going to work. Did people like it, hate it, would they use it, would it actually add any value? So we started building launcher features into one of the games in beforehand, and we did very simple things that companies like King would laugh at. We did cross-promo things, so we did advertising-ish things saying, have you bought this DLC in the game? And suddenly, conversion rate went up 30%. Because maybe that player actually didn't know, and it was nothing intrusive, it was very simple. But those are typical things that we identified, and then we had a separate team who fairly isolated away from the rest of the people because they would panic if we did these things. And we gave them a mandate to build this in one of the games, and then, trying to ship it was always a problem to get it out. It takes a lot longer. So we do this, and we do it with all different levels. It doesn't need to be games. We do it with marketing stuff, we do it with HR, we do it with technology stuff, but most of it is product-driven. So I have kind of a portfolio strategic project. There's like 12 of them running with small teams doing what we call risk level 5, which is red, which is things that probably will fail, but the learnings themselves will be extremely valuable.
And all them are being implemented into this sort of strategy to become the leader of these deep strategic titles.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great. Well, I think I've noticed that we're just after 11 o'clock now. Wow. So I do, though, want to just quickly see if there are any questions before we move on, just in case anyone's got a burning question to ask one of the industry's leading strategists. If you do have a question, just raise your hand. And if not, though, obviously you'll be around at the show.
I'll be here.
I'll be around at the show. You can grab us. But let's give Kim a massive round of applause. Fascinating talk into Paradox's strategy.
Thank you.